I am Captain Spawn, and this is day 343 of Spawn Year. As the snow thickens, so does the plot. Another victim, more pros, and Garland is beginning to put some things together about the killer as Twitch investigates the victims and Sam continues to be disgusted with Garland for trying to get into the writer's mind. There's a distinct conflict forming between their respective approaches to detective work, which reflects the way they each see the world. As we saw frequently in Bendis' stories, Sam is a simple guy and looks at the world in a very black and white sort of way. He knows what's good and bad, and any sort of gray area bothers him because he doesn't understand it. And maybe because his job is easier when he can simply look at killers as inhuman scumbags and not worry with empathizing with them. Sam is concerned with motive and patterns of behavior, but not the more complex psychology. He thinks what Garland does is too based on uncertain intuition rather than facts, and that by giving her credence at all to the idea that the killer's writing can tell him anything about him, they're somehow glamorizing the killer, giving him the undue fame and attention he's probably after. I can see Sam's point, but only up to a point. I'm glad he comes right out and says Garland's nickname glamorizes the murderer, as I wasn't clear on what bothered him about that last time. But even though Sam has never been a deep thinker and would obviously be horrible at literary analysis, maybe he'd have an easier time at Spawn Year because he wouldn't be as driven mad by all the failed attempts at artistic depth, I think Blangio may be oversimplifying Sam by overcompensating to drive this point home. Sam doesn't believe Garland's theory that the writer is killing to have his story read holds water because getting published is too easy in this day and age. He even mentions that he's had a book published, a nice offhanded bit of continuity that would have felt more subtle and rewarding to a veteran Sam and Twitch reader without the annotation. And he certainly has a point. It seems unlikely even a deranged writer would resort to murder just to see his story in print, although just because it's easy to post work on a blog or even to cheaply print traditionally bound books on demand doesn't mean you'll necessarily find an audience, especially given oversaturation and the myriad works vying for readers' attention. I imagine when I get back to my real life, I'll find myself without the kind of viewership I had on Geekvolution before I slipped into that coma. A year is practically a decade in internet time, and it's likely everyone will have moved on. Ah, well, at least I have you, dear reader. But Sam doesn't have nearly enough to go on in making that assumption. By the end of the issue, photos from the morgue have been leaked to the media, and the portions of the narrative on the first victim are being read by the public, which could be precisely what the killer wanted. I don't understand why Sam isn't interested in reading the prose, especially after they have chapters of what appears to be the same story on two victims, a dead cat, and a wall, just because he doesn't think they were killed for the sake of the story. Wouldn't a detective's very first instinct be to look for anything in the writing that might give him a clue about why the killer chooses the victims he chooses or where he might strike next? Even if Sam doesn't buy that Garland can tell he's well-educated, introverted but aggravated, and probably a white male from his handwriting, shouldn't he entertain the notion that a man who leaves hundreds of words on a body in his own handwriting is sick enough to want to get caught? And before you say I've read too many Batman stories involving the Riddler, Twitch invokes the same assumption just moments after the first body is found. Halfway through this story, we've made no concrete connection between the victims. What they might have in common isn't even discussed. And nobody wants to read any of the story? Really? Most of the issue is nonlinear interviews with the people who knew the butcher and prostitute who were killed, and that leads Sam and Twitch to a wall of the killer's writing. Odd that nobody finds it the least bit suspicious that the killer started putting his story in public places before bodies started turning up. That leads Sam to the meat cooler, and we finally catch up to his being trapped there. We get the other side of a phone conversation he had with Garland there last issue, which really reveals nothing new except confirming who he was talking to, which I had gathered. And so far, that nonlinear device is coming off as a cute and clever irritation rather than the most appropriate way to present this story. I wish I could read the the story the writer is putting on the bodies, or what Sam and Twitch have so far. It would be fun to try to solve the case along with them and use that evidence to help decide whether Sam or Garland's side is most reasonable. Plus, it would be appropriate to use the style and structure of the killer's story to inform this one, and especially why it's told that way. There are a lot of symbols and possible metaphors forming, the snow and cold especially, but we're too early in the story to draw any definite conclusions about what they might mean. I remain intrigued, and I love the moody atmosphere, but I wish I could see more of the clues our heroes have, and I'm questioning some of their logic. I can at least be reasonably certain the writer is a better writer than the cover would lead me to believe, where the type prose around the logo, which looks as though there might be a little story there, says, Sam and Twitch, the Writer, Part 2 of 4, hard-edged crime fiction miniseries, over and over and over again. Signed, Captain Spawn.